Hello. So I think Amanda she'll be here in about 20 minutes maybe.
Gotcha.
And I'm not sure what Jesse, I know he's been busy this week, so no Cognition Futures meeting. And then we, of course, didn't have our cybernetics meeting. It's a bi-weekly thing.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. It's us.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess, what are you up to this week?
Well, unfortunately, the things kind of imploded at the Biopunk Society.
Oh,
I
in
don't
what
know.
way?
I can't say what the kids were thinking.
Oh,
It seems to be some differences in direction or
okay. That sort of thing.
philosophy, or I'm not sure. But anyway, very sad.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'd always felt a little disconnected in the sense that we weren't going to try and do organoid stuff there. In the sense that the lab wasn't going to be of that great, or organoid bioreactors are so specialized.
Right.
But it was a really nice community, or it was a real pleasure to be around these young people doing lots of different things in biotech, and so I definitely learned a lot. We'll see. I think they've got another maybe 2 months runway on their place before they would have to take an easy out.
Right.
But by that means, I think renting it out to another biotech company.
Yeah.
But in terms of some really interesting papers have come up. I'm trying to think in terms of any news. I don't think any news. Just missing Astral Star Codex, or
Yeah.
I get that name wrong every time, I'm sure. But still has follow-ups on the discussion around genetic causes of schizophrenia, which again I have to say has been a good conversation, as long as it doesn't distract us from the polygenic nature of neurodevelopment. Well, and if we've learned anything from Levin, that neural development happens in the context of a greater
Right.
a greater complexity that probably needs to be understood before we can understand the neurodevelopment.
Yeah.
And I saw that that Codex has some new grants. It's finally got those grants announced that they've done, and might be interesting on a cognition standpoint. I mean, they're doing some interesting things. He seemed to be interested in some phenomena, especially around learning, that would be easy, or not easy. Sorry, that would be interesting to track from a cognitive neuroscience of learning perspective.
Yeah.
Let me look at I'll look at some of the papers, but no news except no. Can't think of any. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I wonder if I'll surprise myself in looking at the Slack record.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you realize, or somebody posted something about Slack being an acronym?
Oh yeah, it is.
Okay,
It's like the archive of all searchable conversations or something like that.
Yeah. Log of something knowledge.
Yeah.
So let me check the logs.
Oh yeah. So that's I think that was the idea, and then, which I mean, it's been effective in that sense, but yeah.
Well, yeah. So one thing you might have seen, I created a synthetic bio channel.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering about that.
That was mainly just because I was afraid that a bunch of stuff Biopunk Society was going to fall down a memory hole.
Oh yeah.
Which is kind of shifting from one memory hole to another.
Yeah.
But maybe I should post this all in Discord.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, and but anyway, wanted to definitely take some time, maybe this weekend to go through and see. I mean, in general, the good stuff that I posted at Biopunk Society, I would put into brain organoids. But there was some more general kind of synthetic bio links and resources, and especially biomanufacturing, that I might have focused on there. Hey there. Oh yeah, Ed Boyden did the tissue talk for this week, in terms of engineering, tissue engineering.
Yeah.
But so it was a very cool title: Optical Tools for Analyzing and Controlling Biological Computation.
Which is the optogenetics type.
Yeah, it was pretty much. It was like expansion microscopy, optogenetic control, and his third tech. He has something around fluorescent microscopy. And sorry, from a Neurotech standpoint, it is interesting. I didn't realize. So this is more kind of like funding news, but Elemind, ELEMIND, got 12 million round of financing, and I didn't realize that Ed Boyden was a part of that. So this is that's very much Neurotech news.
Yeah.
Although it wouldn't surprise me if it's built around his. It would make sense that he's on it if it's using temporal interference, transcranial electrical stimulation.
Yeah.
But I think it's doing some sort of, we're zapping you while you sleep so that you sleep better.
Yeah.
And I did. I liked the link Hussain sent out on the virtual learning,
virtual cell culture, right? Yeah.
Yes.
No problem. No problem.
Yeah.
I recently applied to Meta as a software engineer too, so we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I really like that in terms of the.
By the way, thanks. Just for hopping in about 10 minutes into the meeting. So I didn't miss too much. Thanks, guys. Thank you guys for both being here. Really excited. Really trying to pick things up more with my research and stuff too, because I've mostly been, I've been part of the lab, been part of oral, but not super involved with too much. Mostly kind of, being more or less like an alumnus of GSOC, but doing my own thing to prepare myself for careers and stuff. And always happy to be here with you guys. Happy to announce a couple of things. First of all, New Reality is on next month. I'm going to be going at Columbia. So going to be super exciting, especially after MIT Reality Hack just last week. And yeah, I can't believe these things are picking up. And I just got into VR and AR like 2 years ago. I'm already going to conferences and hackathons for things like this, and it's so crazy. Because even then, like, it was honestly my decision. Like, no one at U of T, nobody in my life told me to buy a headset or go into VR and AR myself. But even with myself, I'm like, yeah, this will be a nice side hobby. And I was like, this is actually becoming a thing for me. It's really crazy. A lot of things are moving up and picking up. Started streaming on Twitch again too. Even if it's just like for 30 minutes to an hour a week, you know, you got to start, because that's honestly how much you really should be doing when you start off. And I think I've come to realize that social media following is so damn important, even for a lot of these jobs and positions and stuff. Like at University of Toronto, a lot of the academics were big on Twitter and Instagram. And I think for me, even if I'm taking advantage of Twitch, even if I have like 50 followers, that is so niche and cool that they're going to really respect and appreciate that. Because I know so few people come to Twitch to watch science and research anyways, but it's so cool to have that niche anyways. So a lot of good stuff is going on from that perspective too. And yeah, continuing to look for educational opportunities through VR and AR, like say that virtual cell culture, and to think the future of education could be fully virtual. You know, you can learn anytime you want. You can meet with your teachers through headsets. You know, like Zoom era kind of put a schism in whether we need to fully go back to in-person schools to begin with. And you know, I remember one laptop per child. Imagine one headset per child, and the influence of that sort of things. So yeah, happy to see where this goes, and happy to see where this takes. With New Reality next month, I'm still deciding which project I want to do. Whether I want to work on making a neuroscience-based game, like an actual game you play, or making a BCI a BCI interface for the virtual world. And that would be basically what it is, like headset sensors on your head, being able to control the virtual controllers with your brain activity itself, and a keyboard based off of your own brain patterns. But yeah, happy to be here, and thanks guys.
Oh yeah, no problem. Thank you for showing up.
No problem.
It's always good.
I think it's interesting. You know, I mean, I can see. You know, I think what the cell culture really brought out was that there are multiple forms of learning, or multiple. Just how cell culture is multiple tasks in a lab. And how that is, kind of inherently spatial and inherently, again, I forget. I think it was like the blurb from the paper or something. But that like this gives you access to kind of things that would be expensive, and this allows you to practice and get things wrong, and just like how kind of bench work is different than memorizing OChem formulas and things like that, right?
Yeah. I mean, exactly. And like the technology. I think the technology, like whether schools are gonna like if it's gonna be something that's a supplement or a substitute. That's my biggest question I want to figure out as VR takes off. Is it gonna actually legitimately replace things like Common Core curricula? Like buying the physical textbook and studying through it, or is it just going to be like a supplement thing with like like Khan Academy or stuff like that too? And it really depends on how these, like the company I'm working at Alter Learning, it really depends on how they pitch, how investors look at things. But I will say, and as you can probably guess, getting changes through high school settings through K-12 is so difficult. I swear, of all places, like it is like, and I don't know. I grew up in Indiana. I grew up in the Midwest. People like the status quo. People don't like to change in Indiana. Like you want to show a change in something related to academics or workplace things, or even like new infrastructure. People, it's okay. It's easy to say that people are just like stuck up their asses and don't like to change things. I think what's really going on is more so this attitude that's like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So people are already learning things a certain way through high school and academic settings. They're like, okay, VR is cool, but why would we want to change over? So, yeah.
But it's always had a problem. Again, I'm coming from being a developmental psych undergrad, right? So I mean, there's always this problem of you can't take a small percentage of kids and take them out of the regular curriculum and start experimenting with them. And so so there's that, right? There's like how do we potentially deprive some kids of a proper future, and but also I just wanted to emphasize the certainly we have something in place that kind of assumes that everybody learns the same way, and I do think that is a big legacy of education 100 years ago, and that I hope we don't bring to whatever future educational forms we have. Anyway, and I also think about some of the times where, again, like growing up in the UK and then comparing that to, British education and US education, it's like, you can see some big style differences.
Yeah, it's pretty. My family's from England. I think I told you. My dad's side is he went to high school. And he went to high school in England, did his undergrad up in Scotland at Aberdeen.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I think we talked like Scotland's great, or Aberdeen's great, but I cannot understand a word they say.
It gets hard. Well, I grew up in Scotland, so I hear you. And my mom went to Edinburgh. But but what they both share, or what they both certainly do, is kind of give all the kids have to learn the same way.
They're pretty uniform with things.
Literally.
with the actual uniforms. But anyways, like when it comes to VR in education, and it's like, how big is it going to take off? Is it going to be a supplement? Is it going to be a substitute? Are we going to see every kid, the school providing VR headsets for them, or is it going to be something that maybe the special privileged few can buy, and they can do their activities themselves as they want to, and also these questions of like which subjects, like STEM subjects, pretty obvious, like doing experiments in VR that you might not be able to before, being able to do other stuff like that. For other subjects, maybe like English, history, people might be like, well, why do you need VR for that? Like, don't you just like read books and things? And obviously these things depend on a lot of factors, and I would say the biggest is really like the attitude that we in the VR and AR industry can present to show that this is a quality investment, not just for science and research, but for things as a whole. So that it's worth the finances, it's trustworthy, and
it's great points, and I just wanted to say something else. Like I'm trying to remember where I read this, but somebody was talking about how people approach books these days as I think they called this like bullet point books, where like a book is something to be digested, for its information content.
Yep.
And so I also went to St. John's College, which is great book school. There's no technology. They would say you can get an education with 1850s technology. So chalk maybe, and a big part of reading books. And I was just thinking about what do you need for English literature, and just how our discussions were around a book, and we're kind of like engaging with the book, and the discussion that the students had, as well as a big part of that was the tutors are called tutors because they're only the most experienced student in the class. They're not They're not there to profess, right? And like maintaining a role for that as well. Get off my St. John's bias there. Hey, Amanda.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that. So we'll see. Whatever happens, and I think we really need you think like Salcon for Khan Academy. We need something like that for VR when it comes to education, for like someone to just really show to high schools, like the same way Salcon said, you can just hop on YouTube and learn how to do your fractions if you're struggling, and Salcon will explain it to you in a way that's very easy. And he's pretty open about it, that Khan Academy, like for example, is a supplement. It's not a substitute. Like, you're not going to get a quality education through Khan Academy itself. You have to go to your classes. But we really need something like that for VR, and I do legitimately think it has the potential for, in some ways, being a substitute compared to a supplement. So, yeah.
Yeah, this is a great conversation. I'm going to talk about the conference I went to this week in a bit, but it had a lot of these same themes. So yeah, it's definitely something to discuss further. And of course, people have been trying to figure out how to put VR into education for a while. It's kind of like, why would you need something like this to do? How would it enhance education, or how might it replace certain types of education? And so, one thing obviously is like you can do training in VR that you can't necessarily do in another context, or it's very expensive. So, you have flight simulators, for example, that are.
I was going to say
right.
that.
You can not have to have people go up into the air. You can just train them. And there's this issue of transfer of training where you want to make sure that they're actually learning the skills that they would learn in the real world, and that they transfer. And so that's an issue with flight simulators. We know that works. With other things, it's less clear. But there are
nuclear reactors.
Yeah, nuclear reactors. Any sort of large control panel, being able to manipulate it. So
anything just more greatly benefits from the classroom, the office, the room in front of you, not being that.
Yeah.
So like a lab,
right.
like a school shooter, active shooter safety trainings, a surgery recreation demo. The more you do not want the classroom, the more VR is going to benefit you.
Yeah.
So basically, you just have to have a burning hatred towards chalkboards and whiteboards and people. So
yeah.
Yeah, I think I sent you some surgical VR stuff.
And you can look like Physiolab XR. That's affiliated with Reality Hack.
Yeah, that's awesome.
We might have potential for that. No, they're really gathering. Yeah, Amanda, thank you for joining. I was actually recently admitted to the New Reality Hack hackathon in Colombia next month, so we're just talking about that. So really excited for that. And so there are a lot of different projects I can work on too, and I'll keep everybody posted on things. So
yeah, great.
Yeah, and also definitely published results and metrics within academic papers, having that in place and showing student satisfaction, student engagement, and student retention of knowledge improves in VR compared to like sitting in a classroom in person, because that's what people want to see. That's what they want to hear. That's what they want to see.
Yeah,
I've heard so many mixed things about the new Apple headset. By the way, people like buying it and wearing it 24/7. People buying it, throwing it away, or returning it in the box because they realize that I don't have one. I do not have one, but which, by the way, just to be clear, that's spatial computing, not VR.
Yeah.
So that is different, and that is different.
And how is that different? What's that mean? Sorry.
Well.
Okay, I promise you, spatial computing, is not just something that Apple chose just for the sake of being different. Spatial computing itself. Okay, So spatial computing is when you use computers to understand and interact with the physical world around them. So like the sensors, the algorithms to map and track positions of objects. So like I would have my Apple headset and I would see you in front of me. VR is immersing yourself in a computer generated environment. So it's more so, do you take the world around you and hey Jesse, do you take the world around you and do you interact with what's going on in that world? Or are you creating a completely new, like simulated virtual computer generated world? If that's your central question, you are either doing spatial computing or you are doing VR.
What's augmented reality then?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question because it's like, wait a second, isn't spatial computing like really similar to?
It sounds like AR's. It sounds like AR plus capturing your movements so that that you're interacting with the space around you.
Let me just draw this up because there's a really, really succinct way of explaining it. Let me just put it in the chat if you guys want to take a peek at this.
All right.
Yeah. So, but essentially, it's like, what are you doing with the world around you? Are you seeking to understand it? If that's the case, are you understand and interact with the world around you? If that's the case, that's spatial computing. Are you creating a new world? You're immersing yourself in a new computer-generated world. That is VR. That's a virtual reality. Or are you quite literally augmenting the world, like Pokemon Go? You're adding stuff to it. That's AR. That's why Pokemon Go is augmented reality. You pick up your phone and you see like Charmander in your living room or something. Like, yeah. Like I made an app that would let you post sticky notes in the world around you, and I made it as part of my software engineering bootcamp last summer. And that's augmented reality because I'm adding something to the world. So if you want to take note of something, you open up your sticky notes app and post a notes on your desk with your phone. So check the chat. I think that's very succinct. There's a good explanation there. So yeah.
Yeah. So this spatial computing, understanding and interacting with the physical world. So that might include like all sorts of sensors, but also like spatial data and other types of things that we can incorporate into the world. So like if you had things that were in the world, volumetric objects. Yeah. And then virtual reality, creating and exploring a simulated world. So that would be like where you have like a black background or like an immersive background where everything is generated by a computer. And then augmented reality, overlaying digital elements on the real world. So
yeah. I mean, essentially, things are going to get muddy, lines are going to blur, people are going to do things that involve one or both. There's a joke going around on like Twitter. It's like everyone is now replacing VR developer with spatial computing developer right now. They're just in principle replacing it.
Yeah. Well, there's also the marketing imperative.
That's why Apple's headset is spatial computing. It is not VR. So yeah.
It leads into something I'm going to talk about next. And I know that we've been talking about virtual reality, augmented reality. And last year we had some discussions about some of this stuff as well. So, this week I went to a conference actually on virtual reality, augmented reality, all of that. There's this conference here, the first annual IMMERSE symposium. So this was at UIUC, and this was in person, and they invited a bunch of speakers from off campus to come in, and people from around campus also participated. And it's this new initiative. It's this interdisciplinary initiative that they're starting up. And this figure, we talked about the white paper a little bit last week, or mentioned it, and Jesse said it was good, so, but this figure kind of showcases what they're interested in. So there's, the technologies, the applications, and the human experience. And so they want to bring people together from different areas. You have people doing like software architectures, you have people doing hardware, and then you have people doing usability and human experience sort of stuff. So you have like this very busy diagram where you have technologies, applications, and human experience in this circle out at the outside here, and then in the there's an inner circle that says research, education, and infrastructure. So those aren't particularly oriented towards the topics, but they're interested in the educational aspect, the research aspect, and then the infrastructural aspect, which is like, how do you manage, software, or how do you manage connectivity and things like that. And so all of this is really, just kind of bringing a lot of expertise together in ways that haven't really been brought together too much before. So, there are all sorts of things here. They always do these, like, they always have these buzzwords that they stick into these diagrams. But basically, that was the structure of the conference. So the speakers, some interesting speakers, people talking about education, usability design. Steve Lavelle used to be at the UIUC, but now he's at the University of Oulu. He was involved in Oculus, the early days of Oculus. So we talked about a paper of his a while back in the group that was on perceptual engineering. So he talked about that during his talk, and is really kind of laying out the groundwork for a lot of these interactions and how you can manipulate perception or mediate perception with VR and spatial computing and AR and all of that. So that was an interesting talk. There were people talking about standards and using VR in research, not just like in like behavioral research, but also in biomedical research. So they had someone from the NIH, and they had some interesting tools that they had developed for looking at different, like I think it was looking at different biomolecules in VR and having the infrastructure for that. And they had, speaker from Meta. They had some other people. They had local people as well. So they had people on in computer science, in design, in the social sciences, education, just a range of expertise that, can be brought to bear on this topic. So, there are a lot of really interesting talks. Just kind of went through these different topics. So there were different, kind of structured around this immersive technologies, immersive applications, and immersive human experience themes. And so this was a nice little conference. It was maybe about 150 people attending, at different times, coming in and out. But it was good. One of the projects locally at UIUC that they're doing, and this is kind of like one of the main partners in the IMMERSE initiative, is this extended reality test bed. So this is an example of sort of a test bed that you can use to build applications, and they were showing off some of what they were doing. So there are a lot of bottlenecks in terms of the infrastructure, the technology, developing different applications, but also having you have to have sort of this real-time performance with low latency so that people's experience doesn't break up, so that they can communicate with each other. And it's very hard to do because you're dealing with a lot of data. You're dealing with applications that, are often both, social, spatial, and also having a lot of heavy graphics rendering that needs to be done.
Yep, absolutely. From a computer vision and computational perspective in 3 dimensions, if you were to ask me what's the biggest bottleneck, biggest limitation, biggest capacity, biggest thing holding that back, absolutely I'd point to those sorts of issues and problems from the beginning,
Yeah.
Yep. Even if you think of like video games themselves, when they went from 2D to 3D, it was difficult, like figuring out how to program in 3 dimensions too.
The original Final Fantasy VII game was not very clear.
Oh, I was thinking Super Mario 64 on the N64, because we were like in Super Mario Bros. The biggest example that's so easy to demonstrate is like in Mario, like on the NES, the 2D side scroller in 2 dimensions. You get a fire flower. You can throw fireballs left and right, and it's so easy to program. Just program a fireball with gravity, and it has momentum, and Mario throws it. Imagine doing that in 3D, in 3 dimensions. So you have to you give the player, you give the user an ability to throw something like a fireball, but if there's a target, how the hell are they going to aim? Like they're holding a controller in front of them, which they could use for moving in 3D, but being able to like aim properly and navigate a 3D world that way, like good luck. So it and not just with graphics, but with the actual controlling and interface. Oh, thank you for the visual. Thank you. Yeah, but they did really well for the first shift from the first legitimate shift from 2D to 3D in video games. But like Miyamoto himself, he wanted to give the user like a 3D view of Mario, and that was something that was like basically the ability to control the camera around Mario as you're playing. So those were things that, from a spatial perspective, did take a lot of innovation with the hardware and software and graphics programming. So yeah.
And then, of course, you have a lot of tracking that you have to do of the eyes and the hands and your spatial position. So those are all things too that you deal with. So yeah, this Elixir. They do a lot of hardware stuff and software stuff, and they have a GitHub repository, so it's open source. So there are a lot of tools that you can use. There are different open source tools that can be used. I know we're used to kind of the packaged. Now we're used to the packaged consumer VR, but there is also this sort of rolling your own aspect of it, and that can be done for tracking and for other things.
I think I saw this like 2 years ago with some of the Project North Star people.
Oh, right. Project North Star.
These are Leap Motion. Leap Motion engineers. Yeah. Right. I mean, the Elixir.
Right.
And by the way, sorry, just following up on something from a couple meetings ago, this IARPA 2017 project that we had a data challenge on. Anyway, I put a link in the. This is just something about Stephen Lavelle gave me a flashback.
Yeah.
And anyway, it was called the Insights Study that was there at UIUC. So I just wanted to say I'd like to follow up with you on that, Bradley. I put it into Cognition Futures.
Okay. Yeah, I don't. I'll look at it.
Yeah, have a look and see, but and then I can follow up in terms of what we did as the IARPA challenge.
Oh, okay. This is yeah. All right. Yeah, I'll take a look at that. So yeah, that's what. And then I actually presented a poster in the session. So let's see. Actually, why don't we go through the white paper a little bit, and I'll talk about the poster. So the white paper, they talk about some of these thrusts that they're doing in IMMERSE, some of the activities that they might want to do. So a lot of these centers, they have to propose grants to get large amounts of money to sort of fund a lot of the activities. And they always have to be very balanced in it. They have to do the research thrust, the education workforce development thrust. So you're doing education, but you're doing it for workforce development, although, and this is creating credentials and things like that, which don't necessarily exist. You can, I don't know how many schools offer education in a degree in virtual reality or whatever you want to call it. I mean, even in computer science departments, it kind of takes a backseat to other things. So it's really an interdisciplinary field. So you need to kind of have your own sort of credentials for it. That's what they're trying to do here with some of what they're doing. But I also think, there are also opportunities to get like what they call micro credentials, which are, I've acquired the skill, or we're, working on towards this sort of goal. Here's a credential saying that you're competent in it. And it definitely, there's a lot of flexibility here, but in fields like this where you have to bring together a lot of areas of expertise, I think it's important to really kind of rethink maybe some of the ways we credential people as well.
Yeah, I would even come. I don't want to interrupt the flow too much, but that's something I'd like to come back to and talk about later, because a lot of the things that I'm using the phrase language models and artifacts a lot. That's sort of my current thing, and what I mean by that is like, you to do new things or to do integrative things, you have to be really intentional about the language and the models and artifacts. And credentials kind of come into this like evaluatory sense of you are being fluent in language, you are using the models the right way, you're making artifacts that kind of fit in line with it. And it's like, how do you do that with really integrative things in new ways? So part of why I like the white paper is that they kind of, it's not perfect, but it's this sense of I think I would like the aspirational, like what they're trying to incorporate into it. And so, yeah, I agree a lot with what you said about credentialing part too.
Yeah. And then, of course, the infrastructure, which is where you need to have, like, there's a lot of infrastructure, of course, that doesn't exist for this. So, like, you have not only the technology, like, integrating all these technologies, tracking and connectivity and graphics and all, but also like kind of like places where we can get like user studies, or understand how people use the technology, and then how do you go back to designing it, and maybe we need to understand like some of these latencies. What's acceptable as a latency? So some of the VR technology that we have today, in fact, the Apple Vision Pro uses foveated rendering, where you just render like what's in the immediate field of view, and then you just track the eyes so you know where that is. And that's the part that's high resolution, and the peripheral areas are lower resolution. But it's something you don't see, immediately. So it's not important information. So you can use that kind of strategy to sort of get around some of these bottlenecks and stuff like that, which have been developed. But you really need to develop those kinds of technologies with user studies, because you don't really know what people are doing, how they're using it, how they're perceiving things, and so forth. So it's definitely all sort of this single thing. And then they talk here about designing systems for the post-Moore era, which is of course Moore's law, where they could count on a certain amount of performance gain over time as they were developing chips and making them smaller and more efficient. They could rely on that increase in computation. Well, we can't necessarily do that anymore. So we have to sort of design around that, get better performance out of less hardware potential. And there are also some energy things that they put in here, which, of course, when you have a device like this, you have to power it, and that's a bottleneck, because even with like the Vision Pro, you don't have like it doesn't have infinite battery life, right? So those are things that we have to kind of think about in terms of the hardware. How do we make that more efficient? Then we also can use those hardware advancements to rethink what it means to have an immersive system. So there are all sorts of ways that we can kind of exploit these advances. One thing they're really on at this conference was on NERFs, or neural radiance fields, and so using those to design, really good, better graphics, I guess. So a NERF is where you take a two-dimensional image, you take different perspectives, and you synthesize a three-dimensional image or a moving image that gives you like basically this. It's a better type of algorithm than classical algorithms for rendering stuff. So it's really, it's sort of the cutting edge. I also saw a lot of things on generative AI, in terms of using that to generate stimuli and environments. And so we talked about generative AI, of course, but the potential there is that you can generate it, based on the context of the user. So if you're in a certain environment, what gets generated in that environment, those sorts of things. And then, there's this whole issue of design. And then they have these technology activities. So, there's a lot of infrastructure needs to be put into place. And then, being able to incorporate this into people's workflows, which is always challenging. And then, kind of breaking down the barriers between disciplines. So this is really kind of a big challenge as well. I think we talked last week about some of the challenges in cybernetics, where you have people. If you're a cyberneticist in an engineering department, or you're a cyberneticist in some other department, you always kind of have to go with the dictates of that department, or that sort of research, the expectations of that research field. And so some of these, in disciplines where it's just absolutely essential to have multiple perspectives, it can be a problem. And so this is one of the problems you need to have, a way to get around that. So yeah, this is a nice, and then application themes, healthcare. There was a lot of healthcare stuff, people using VR in hospital settings, and for research. There are a lot of security issues that come up, surprising, or maybe not surprisingly, but these are a lot of barriers, and you take something off the shelf, like a Meta Quest, and you try to use it in a hospital, and you have like a lot of security problems and other things. And so that's a problem. Educating people, training people with things, and then having applications that work across platforms or work in different IT systems. So yeah, that's the white paper. I think it's instructive. I presented something I've been working on for a long time, something called Naturally-supervised Learning. So I published this paper a long time ago now. We're working on this project where you would be able to interact with a virtual environment, and you'd manipulate your physical environment in a certain way, and your body would react to that by adapting to those conditions, and it would improve your performance in the virtual environment. That's basically it. So your body, or your physiological systems, your psychological systems are supervising the learning that you're getting from a virtual environment. And so I did this with a number of different experimental settings. This actually used, I don't know if people know of or remember the Novant Falcon, which is this little controller here, and you grab it and you move the knob. And they have the software where you can explore different surfaces. And so it really does feel like you're exploring things like a ball of honey or a rubber ball or a metal ball. And, that sort of feedback, you can then, look at how people deal with those kinds of surfaces. So there are all sorts of technologies we can use to sort of probe these mechanisms and see how people deal with learning. And so that's one thing. And then I updated this with a poster talking about some of the things we can do to manipulate perception, manipulate those things in that direction.
And Bradley, how much of that previous paper did you focus on our perception of ourself? In terms of, I just suddenly thought of like Ramachandran experiments where you feel like something that's not you is part of you, or vice versa, or
Well, it didn't really talk about that too much. Yeah, didn't really talk about that too much, but that would definitely be something, because you're talking about I think things like I can't remember what he had in some of his, where you would look in a mirror, or even the rubber handle.
That or like the arms under the table, but there's an arm on it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't talk too much about that in the paper, but yeah, it's definitely something that would fit into that. I'll take a note on it.
Rubber hand illusion has been recreated in VR. It's been successful.
Okay.
Yeah. Bradley, did you mention IMMERSE? IMMERSE is going to be doing a conference of some kind in March. Is that true, sir?
What do you mean? Well, the conference was this week. This past week.
The conference was this week.
Yeah, it was this past week.
Okay.
That's where I presented the poster, and then the paper is from a while back. But yeah, so the idea here is that you have these sort of naturally supervised learning. The natural supervision is like your physiological system, your psychological system can play a role in filling in the gaps of the action perception loop. So we talk about manipulating environments in VR, but you can also get that effect from from the human systems, I guess. And so that's something, it's like something, you would like to follow up on if we could do the optimal experiments, but yeah. And so it's really, it really is dependent on some of and a lot of this sort of research, it depends on having exactly the right kind of VR setup to get really nice effects, but those haven't existed. And maybe they'll exist soon, but we don't, that's kind of one of the things about doing experiments in VR and AR, and that is that the optimal systems for doing experiments don't really exist. People have done things with like animal perception, and they have to build things that are sort of amenable to the organism of interest perceptual systems. So like for insects, they use these arenas with LED lights that, kind of like sit around the animal. And of course, insects have compound eyes, which are these very different from the human eye or mammalian eyes. And so you have to build the VR system to sort of conform to that. But you can actually do some interesting things in those kind of environments. So that, there are all sorts of ways that you can design the hardware to sort of fit around the research question you're asking. And that's one of the big barriers to a lot of the, the behavioral stuff that, we can do, or we might be able to do. So that's good. So that's all I'm going to talk about there. I wanted to maybe circle back to Amanda or Jesse if they had any updates.
I don't have any updates. We didn't have our normal meetings this week.
Yeah.
But I'm looking forward to next week.
Yeah, name too. Thanks.
There's not much I'm going to say here, which I'm sure is a sigh of relief, but more sense of there's definitely. I'd like to request sort of a meeting to discuss something else that came up this week separately. I was at an event this week for work and other things, and had a really interesting set of events happen. One of them had to do with genetics and epigenetics and developmental impacts on things like autism and developmental disorders. And it was really, really fun to talk about. I had a few opportunities to talk with the speaker about this because we were there to talk about it for certain reasons, but then we get to talk about it for other reasons on kind of the sidebar chat. And it was really interesting to hear from someone in their perspective, and they're someone who's very different background than me in terms of like 100% biology focus, and their take on some of the models and stuff, and where the nuance is or isn't, and their approach to dealing with how to add more nuance to modeling things like what a person is, what their developmental path is, how to think about requirements for people who may have a genetic inclination towards a developmental disease, disorder, or bad outcome, and what they're seeing and what they're doing. So that was a really, really, really interesting thing from that angle. And then this week also contained, yeah, just some interesting, a lot of things in terms of going a little bit back to the to the white paper that I broadly kind of mentioned here. I guess the best way to talk about it right now is sort of, in the white paper you kind of see, or if you go to the website and stuff about it, you see this sort of really, it's this gesturing towards this big collaboration between people from different backgrounds, and you kind of put this big idea, and you have these plans, and you have this thing that you're going to try to aim for, and you get then you get to do, okay, how can we do these like collaborations that pursue specific goals that are going to mutually beneficial to the parties involved. And it's just, I don't know, I've been thinking quite a bit about the nature of organizing that, and how that works. It's a similar effort between, if we have different teams working on putting you could say a product or some kind of deliverable together in a more industry space versus sort of the industry industry academic, like collaborative research partnerships, which is something that I'm interested in and I need to brush up on. But sort of, I don't know. There's a lot in terms of. I guess I'll conclude this section by saying, as I've said in some previous meetings, it's almost like what's actually taking place, and maybe this is like a truer understanding of being like a researcher or a lab director or something with that scale, but it's sort of going from lab manager to research coordinator or whatever term towards like strategic initiatives, because I find that that's a little more of a plain way to see what's. It reminds me much more of like startup days in that sense, and what I mean by that is there's an aspect of doing the work that is there's getting the data, and there's doing the research and the theory work that the data gets, and there's sort of there's the element that's beyond just the funding. It's sort of how do you try to coordinate both from a practical perspective, but then also from a vision and sort of like let's all work on this vision together sense, which is a very interesting skill set and approach and part to diplomacy and all that stuff. So I don't have anything concrete to say about that, but to say my week has been full of all of those things that I just mentioned, and I'm so glad. I didn't think I was going to be able to come today, so I'll say because I've been the travel has just wiped me out. In addition to be a really grueling time period and things I had to do, but I'm very happy to be here and have the discussions. And there's some things I'd like to follow up on, but I think a lot of things I'll follow up on will be outside of this meeting. So I might message about that later. But interesting stuff to hear so far. I'd be curious, what was the first like 20 minutes? I know I kind of came in through some VR talk and stuff like that too.
We just talked. I think we were talking mainly about like VR and education, and we're catching up on some things that some sort of Morgan updates.
Okay.
So yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you, Jesse. That was interesting. Yeah. So yeah. Oh, yeah. Hussain has a T-shirt from Reality Hack. So get yours today, I guess.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah. No. Yeah. Thanks for joining, Jesse. I was just announcing that I'll be attending New Reality Hackathon at Columbia.
I saw that in Slack.
Yep. Just messed out in Slack.
Is it like Missouri or which Columbia?
Columbia University in New York City.
Oh, cool, nice.
Yep.
Back to the East Coast.
I'm terrified of Columbia. I've heard bad things about them.
Oh,
I
really?
was considering going there for grad school. People told me not to. They actually straight up told me don't go to Columbia. The culture there was just very toxic. That's what they told me. But you know, whatever happens, happens. I'm sure the hackathon will be nice. Yeah.
Is that one's in March? March
Yeah,
8th?
it's like March 8th to March 11th. So just in a few weeks actually. Well, next month, yeah.
Okay. I forget where I'm supposed to be at that point, but I don't know if it's New York or not. Oh, please, as a general reminder to everybody, like if you do get to go someplace or you're you get accepted somewhere, please let us know because we want to at least support, if not try to, because we're so distributed. You know, it's sort of like I think our last major meetup was like we tried something in Chicago
Yeah.
when Avery was in town, and I was there, and Denny was also in town for Plot Twister. So we didn't all four of us meet up, but we kind of had a loose alignment of the stars and whatever to meet up. So that's cool to try to do. But yeah, hopefully that goes well, and it's good to hear the updates from all those events. So that's good.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. We had some things in the chat here. Oh yeah, okay. These are related to our previous discussion. So yeah, so in our Slack, we have, I'll highlight three things actually, as we can tend to spend a lot of time on this. But first thing I wanted to talk about was this, I think is a paper in Brain Organoids. And this is a neuron paper. I thought this was really interesting. Data science opportunity of large language models for neuroscience and biomedicine. This is a new paper from I guess the Montreal Neurological Institute and Mila in I think it's based out of McGill. So yeah, a lot of people in that community in Montreal.
University of Montreal.
Yeah. Okay. And so yeah, this is a interesting paper. You know, they have these. They always have these kind of position papers, or like they're preparing the Earth for this area, and this is kind of what they're trying to do here. So, you know, we talk about large language models as being these kind of new models that, you know, we don't know what to do with necessarily. And so this is a primer on defining properties of these modeling techniques, looking at new modes of investigation which large language models can be used, or how they can be used to reframe classic neuroscience questions. We reason that large language models have the potential to enrich neuroscience data sets by adding valuable meta information, such as advanced text sentiment. So I guess it's like maybe adding annotation or adding in something to the data set that we don't have. B, summarizing vast information sources to overcome divides between siloed neuroscience communities. So in that case, I think they mean like literature mining and, you know, the sort of stuff we've talked about with like the Levin bots, where, you know, you're taking a whole field of science and you're kind of asking questions about it and getting answers that may or may not be, you know, very clear, but you can at least intuit some of these connections between different neuroscience communities in the literature. C, enabling previously unthinkable fusions of disparate information sources relevant to the brain. So again, like it's not just like the sort of literature review aspect. It's actually like if you have like a bunch of, say, like brain areas and information about them, you can then put together models based on like querying an LLM and saying, you know, what does this brain area do? What is it connected to, etc. It's almost like querying your way to a research paper. Like, you know, you might write a research paper that said, we queried an LLM about these brain networks. There might be like, you know, 40 different brain networks that we're interested in, and we found them through queries. You know, it's this kind of a new way of thinking about research. And then D, helping deconvolve which cognitive concepts most usefully grasp phenomena in the brain, and much more. So I guess that means that, like, you know, building a conceptual landscape, maybe a different landscape. So we talk about like the brain is a computer. So that's just something we assume that exists in the literature. But maybe, if we think about the sort of the linguistic aspect of that metaphor, could we build another metaphor and have different linguistic aspects to it? So like, what a metaphor is basically like taking something and like taking its features and saying, well, the brain has these features, or it has a parallel to these features. So when people say the brain is a computer, they mean that, there's a processor, or there's like some sort of transformation of information or data. So you can just make you can query for those things in the model, and then you can see if that's a good, well-formed metaphor. So yeah, there are a lot of things you can do with large language models. So that's what they're making the case for here, talking about the roots of large language models and natural language processing and n-gram models and bagger words and all that. So this is, and then of course, after 2010 or so, we get semantic embeddings. This is something that an advance in natural language processing modeling. So, people were taking documents from the web and they were like segmenting them into different embeddings. So you had single words, sentences, paragraphs, and entire documents that were being, segmented and represented in computers. And so that led us to some of these models like Word2Vec and GloVe. And these were semantic embeddings that existed previous to large language models. And then, of course, we had the large language model development, which has been in the last few years. And so this uses transformers and other types of more advanced architectures. And it's a form of generative AI, so it generates things. They give a figure here on the self-attention mechanism and transformer architectures. So they kind of go through this. And I know Hussain said the other day that sometimes you meet people working in technologies who don't know what a transformer, like they're working in AI or VR.
Yeah, I mean, just as one example, you see people with portfolios filled to the brim, and they're like, I don't have a CS degree, but look at all these LLMs I've built. And then you ask them, okay, so what's a transformer? And they're just kind of like stuck. They can't explain it. They don't understand the idea of like attention or like the matrices involved, how to do things like that. So more so the importance of understanding the maths and the science and having a strong academic and theoretic background, in addition to the ability to produce results as you need to. So yeah, thanks so much for sharing, Bradley. That's all absolutely relevant. So
Yeah. So I mean, this is the kind of thing, when you want to introduce self-attention and transformers to a neuroscientist, and that's the kind of figure you need. It's just that they don't have like the very deep technical knowledge of like a machine learning researcher. So this is a nice figure. And then this one also, where they talk about this architecture some more, kind of the steps that go into this. So, a neuroscientist would look at this and think about it in a fresh way relative to a machine learning researcher, because they'd see it and say, well, that doesn't look like the kind of attention I'm used to in neuroscience. But, they can understand like the flow of things going on. So, this is a good paper. Again, oh, you're going to say something?
And just that Dan Lowe's, the first author, is one of my heroes in psychiatry.
Okay, yeah.
It's like as a kind of brain imager, who brings, who uses the tools of machine learning in new and interesting ways, but mostly for psychiatry. So it's just like yeah.
My hero is probably Carl Friston. He's a hero to many. Yeah.
But he's a meta hero.
Yeah, meta learning.
Bradley, are you familiar with Friston's work? To say the free energy principle.
Oh yeah. Very familiar. Yeah.
I think he is the most cited neuroscientist on the planet right now.
Yeah, yeah. He's done a lot of pioneering neuroimaging work.
I liked how they called LLM was a new asset class.
Yeah, they do mention like foundation models, and then they get into this large language models for biological sequences, which I think is interesting.
Oh, and yeah, speaking of special meetings, we should schedule something to talk about the Adam Saffron.
Oh yeah, we'll do that.
RIP, yeah.
All right.
I wanted to share this. I wanted to share this book that I bought recently too, Interfaceless.
Okay. Oh
My
yeah.
my friend Dayan wrote this book. It's not as fancy as it sounds. It's called Interfaceless: Conscious Design for Spatial Computing with Generative AI by Diana Olenek. And she's an engineer. She works in XR, and she's a published author thanks to this book now. And like I said, it's not as fancy as it sounds. It's not as academic or theoretic. It goes into academic topics, but it is essentially one of the best introductions to these ideas of VR, spatial computing, AR, and anything that isn't the typical interface like a computer laptop screen that we normally think of. She does such a great job of explaining like what exactly do eye tracking systems do? What do they cover? You know, how do we go beyond like the role of like AI automation and see what happens beyond that too? Yeah, everything is all related, and like exploring generated by AI and its transformative power. It's you know, it's got some really bold claims about spatial computing and the future of the future of spatial computing itself. But there it is, a nice person-friendly introduction to those things, going into academic topics, but not boring you and not being too technical.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that'd be a great thing to check out. Yeah, second thing I wanted to talk about here was in the Cognition Futures channel. So that was Morgan who shared the paper on LLMs. And then, yeah, this is some links. Oh, this is the InSight study that you mentioned before. So this is, an integrative system for enhancing fluid intelligence through human cognitive activity, fitness.
That's just a super old thing.
Yeah, Aaron Barbie, who's a neuroimager at Beckman, does that. Yeah, I know what that is. Yeah, I'll take a look at it and give you.
Sure. I'd like to focus on it. They've come back to it, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, it relates to some old stuff that we were talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, so then this one here is really interesting. This is dynamic computational phenotyping of human cognition. And basically what they did in this paper, they looked at some tasks, some very classic tasks in neuroscience and in cognitive psychology. And then they had this model here, and then they took the parameters, and then they extracted these functions. So they have random noise as a function of parameter value. You have practice or learning, which is like this learning curve that starts that has a certain learning rate that asymptotes out towards the top. So it's a logarithmic type of thing, log linear type of function, and then state effects. So this is where kind of you can look at like different emotional states. For example, where over time, your mood shifts between positive and negative valence, and you have this kind of function here. And so that's what they're trying to extract out of these different models. So they have these tasks: two-arm bandit, numerosity comparison, lottery ticket decision making, change detection, go no go, and then they have this daily mood and habits questionnaire, and then this is just the type of model here, and then the parameters. So they extract parameters out of each of these tasks, and then they build these functions. So let's look a little bit at the paper. This is Sam Gershman is on this, and the abstract reads: computational phenotyping has emerged as a powerful tool for characterizing individual variability across a variety of cognitive domains. So they're trying to phenotype from these behavioral related tasks and trying to extract parameters so that they can actually kind of figure out what the phenotype is. What are the things that need to be controlled in these kinds of tasks? So, going across cognitive domains, it's kind of hard to have any one set of parameters, and that you saw that in that figure. But, just to have like a map of that, so we know kind of what kinds of things are, and also what kinds of experiments are best for extracting these kind of parameters. So, maybe some experiments aren't very good at really revealing that phenotype, and some are. So that, people have these experiments that they run, that people have kind of developed. That's why we have these experimental paradigms, because they allow us to sort of, just say, we're going to design an experiment in this way, and it should work. So that's why we have the types of experiments that we do. It's not just that we throw people in front of a stimulus and just have them do things, although you can do that. The problem with that is it isn't as well characterized in terms of these parameters. An individual's computational phenotype is defined by a set of mechanistically interpretable parameters obtained from fitting computational models to behavioral data. So again, we use computational models to extract things out of the behavioral data, and then we can get these parameters. However, the interpretation of these parameters hinges critically on their psychometric properties, which are rarely studied. So, it's kind of hard to go back and say, we're going to extract some parameters out of the data from the behavioral experiments, but then we're going to go back and see maybe what's happening in the brain that yields these parameters. And critically, how can we modify those parameters in different ways? Could we do it through, some sort of drug intervention or virtual reality, or, changing the stimulus in a certain way?
Bradley, it's funny because this actually has a lot of overlap with insight.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Is that funny?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that's like one of the key things about like, neuroscience. Well, we talk about like science as being part of it is being able to control or manipulate things, and that's sort of like the applied domain. But that's one of the things you kind of, with really powerful experiments, you can reveal ways that you can like actually. Yeah.
So I mean, there's a lot of reasons like this, but I don't know if you remember last week I was saying like the Middlebury Summer Language Program, is this really unique like 9 to 12 week program of second language learning, right? And how few experiments like track something over that kind of length scale, and especially where there's to some degree there's like you're looking for this complex skill mastery, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever you want to call language learning. Anyway, this seems to be doing those things.
Yeah.
And so much, but better, in a better cognitive neuroscience way.
Oh yeah. So yeah, so to identify the sources governing the temporal variability of the computational phenotype or phenotypes, we carried out a 12-week longitudinal study using a battery of 7 tasks. So they did this 12-week longitudinal study, which means you take the participants, you measure them at one point, you come back like in another week and you measure them again, and you keep doing this, and then you get this longitudinal data set. And it's not a time series. It's just like if you perform on one day, right, and then you come back the next week, you perform maybe differently, you might be able to see things like, they use this oftentimes to look at development, sometimes learning, where you want to just see how long it takes for someone to learn things, or how people change over time. And sometimes it's not necessarily related to learning. It's related maybe sometimes to just variability. Sometimes they forget things and so forth. So it's a way to kind of get at some of these things over time, over long periods of time, like Morgan was saying. So they do these 7 tasks. They feature a variety of different types of cognition to examine the influence of state effects. Each week, participants provided reports tracking their moods, habit, and daily activities. So each week there's some variability, but we want to know, we want to be able to connect that to, kind of consistent behaviors. We developed a dynamic computational phenotyping framework, which allowed us to tease apart the time-varying aspects of practice and internal states, such as affective valence and arousal. You were going to say something, Morgan?
No, if anything, I was talking to my dog.
Okay.
Does your dog have anything to say though? Any contributions?
she has a lot to say. She has a lot of names.
That's peer review. That's peer review. So Bradley, do you imagine any sort of similarities to say the human genome being the genetic factors underlying the basis for how DNA influences the role the DNA plays in who we are as human beings. Yeah. Something similar on a computational perspective, as in on some level being able to identify, say, like a computational blueprint for all of us people. Like the DNA, the genome being a blueprint for genetics, for DNA and for life and biology. Some sort of computational blueprints underlying human cognition itself as well.
Yeah, well, I think that's what they're trying to get at here. There's also this, people use omics as a term. It's like, I'm going to take a bunch of data and try to find this blueprint. So there was the genomics project. There was the Human Genome Project. There have been genomics, where they've sequenced genomes, and then of course you have transcriptomics, and you have behavioromics and all sorts of omics. So those kind of projects, they just bring a lot of data into play. In this case, I think that's what they're trying to do, is trying to get a sense of the behavioral underpinnings, or at least maybe the neural underpinnings of a lot of these cognitive behaviors, and they're trying to figure out how to get to that. Because in genomics, you have sequences, you have information of how those sequences are expressed. But still you don't have any information about, very specific functions, because there are a lot of interactions going on. We had a discussion about that actually, I think in bioevolution. This paper here, or this was a paper by Dennis Noble when it was a review of Philip Ball's book on life, and so this is basically, there's this argument about how, maybe the human genome, even though it gives us that omics perspective, maybe that isn't really giving us all we need to know about how genes translate into, phenotypes, like organisms or behavior or whatever. And so that's a conversation that's ongoing. So, this approach, gives us maybe the basis for this, but we always have to think critically about what it's actually giving us. Are we able to actually get at some of these things? And then, bridging the gap between cognition and say genetics, it maybe makes it easier to make those kind of comparisons, but it's hard to say, because they're not really looking at any, they're just kind of characterizing the behaviors. They're not looking at the underpinnings of the behaviors and so forth. So.
Cool. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. So this computational phenotyping framework, our results show that many phenotype dimensions co-vary with practice and affective factors, which is emotional factors, indicating that what appears to be unreliability may reflect previously unmeasured structures. This is interesting because, we, with behavior, a lot of times, depending on your experimental framework, you do have a lot of these confounds, you do have a lot of these sources of unreliability, sources of variation. And the question is, can we reduce that to, something that we can understand, explain the variance? So what they're doing here is the approach they're using they're saying that a lot of the unreliability in some of these methods, if you measure in just the right way, you're actually measuring the structure that exists there. And so I think they're getting at, they don't have something in terms of control at the level of the genome, but they have like this, they're finding more structure than they would otherwise find. These results support a fundamentally dynamic understanding of cognitive variability within an individual. So they're looking at different types of cognition. They're looking at different types of performance between individuals. And they're using these kind of models to sort of find these kind of, I don't want to say primitives, but like like basically ways to, parameters to understand these things or to tune. So that's what this paper is about. And so this is really, I like that they provide this sort of summary figure where they kind of extract parameters from different tasks and then build these graphs and show like that there are these, characteristic functions. And, we've talked about augmented cognition before in the group. And this is kind of the tool you need for augmented cognition. You need, for example, say to be able to characterize a learning curve. And once you do that, then you can say, okay, how does this learning curve change? How can we tune the learning curve? If we intervene somewhere with like VR or with like some sort of intervention with a computer, with learning, how can we change that learning curve and optimize it or change it to just be improved? The same thing with emotion, with arousal, you can modify or restrict, arousal or, different emotional states to a manageable range, given the context. And so these are things that are, I think very useful for augmented cognition as we define it. And, that's one of the problems is that with augmented cognition is you need that function. You need to have the correct function to do that kind of work. Okay, yeah.
Really interesting. Really interesting. And again, like as it relates to insight, this is what you also want to have in terms of looking at educational interventions, and great paper.
Yeah, I think that's, I'm finding a major thing that in terms of human stuff, I was just talking to a friend, a colleague of mine about like some of the scopes of things I want to do in the future and like how to categorize them. And in the human space, I think the efforts, because I was reading a little bit, I basically want to read the paper much more in depth because I feel like the aims where they're talking about, I just lost the paper, but that's okay. The aims where they're talking about, like, in the next section, it gets into like, untangling the sources of individual variability remains a central challenge of cognitive science, sure. But like, how do you do that? How do you actually try to do that? And they list a bunch of, references there in terms of like cross-species variation, brain function, illnesses, developmental. So I feel like that's definitely an area that I think is, I seem to continues to be drawn to like what is the nuance area, and like that, yeah, we are doing a lot of that in conditional features already. Like we're wanting to put in the developmental aspect, we're wanting to put in like the whole one first person stuff that we're putting a lot of time on. But I'm curious to see what more can come from that paper and seeing the rest of the author's work in it. Because I'm a little bit familiar with Gershwin obviously, but I don't know a lot of the other people. What they've tried to do in that space. So it's a good. I found it on Twitter, but I'm sure other people found it too. So I'm glad we talked about it here.
Yeah, I think this is the paper, the Nature paper, a link to in the chat. I think that is the paper. But yeah, I don't know. Sam Gershwin does a lot of interesting neuroscience stuff. But yeah, I think this paper too, yeah, it does relate to like first person type of stuff, because for first person, what you really need are you need experiments that you need, at least propose experiments that would be something that would characterize like, larger effects. So like, how would I show an effect given like, how would, if I report first person experience, how would I do it in a way, or how would I put a subject in a situation that would reveal like, some effect. So if you had them experience one thing versus another, or like a control condition versus an experimental condition, what would show like the effects that you want to show? Because like you can do, like I said, you can put people in front of a stimulus that can be done. You can do like naturalistic studies, but you sacrifice like being able to get like large effects that really show, that demonstrate that some intervention is working. And so
yeah, Gershman would definitely talk about this sort of trade-off, especially between the precision and being able to separate signal from the noise. And that's pretty central to human cognition across the senses, across information processing. The more fine-tuned, the more precise you are, and the sensitivity towards information ideas, the more difficult it can be to produce flexible responses between dynamic and adaptive scales and perspectives. So, I think Gershman outlines it pretty well in his book. Like, there's this fundamental puzzle of, like, I mean, he was kind of like, how are humans so smart and stupid at the same time? That's how he describes it. So,
yeah. So then the third thing I wanted to talk about, this is a Medium post by Mark Humphreys, who's so neurons, data science, and AI. So basically that space. So the reason that's important is because he's doing this review of the year in neuroscience for 2023, and the subtitle is "Dopamine is Not the Only Fruit." So this kind of talks about, let's skip straight to the neurosciences here, shall we? Even this one small area of human endeavor has not escaped the forces unleashed by tech bros who think ethics are something that happened to other people. Okay, that's pretty polarizing to start off with, but so let's see. Okay, so this is the first paper, error. So this is, I think, about dopamine. You wouldn't have thought we'd have much new to learn about dopamine, or more accurately, about how dopamine conveys information about reward. It's been 25 years since Schultz, Dayan, and Montague's classic paper in Science, which is this paper here, a neural substrate for prediction and reward. So this is sort of a review of the work that had been done on dopamine up to that point. So dopamine at one time was very popular as a way to kind of think about addiction or like motivation, and it's kind of like this magical chemical, neurochemical. And so that's where this comes from. This was back in 1997. So this was a review of a lot of this work. And of course, this relates to reinforcement learning. This relates to, a lot of psychiatry and so forth. They laid out how the firing of dopamine neurons in a monkey's midbrain looked remarkably like they were signaling the error in predicting a reward. So this is where you have this formal model of how dopamine acts in the brain. So it's acting from dopamine neurons in the midbrain. It's signaling error in predicting a reward. So firing more to unexpected rewards, not changing their firing to expected rewards. So it's selective for rewards that are preferential, and firing less when an expected reward didn't turn up. So this is very reinforcement learning like, and this is sort of the basis for a lot of sort of the behavioral paradigms that we know of in neuroscience, in behavioral neuroscience, but also in